Okay. Welcome, new job, who dis? This is the implementation of a new integrated pest management program. I apologize for anybody who thinks that they're here to learn about what to do if you do have a pest problem. This is just me learning the ropes of how I learned how to do the IPM at my museum. So when you put the words together, the phrase integrated pest management sounds simple, but it's a complicated concept that as the name implies, the program incorporates the pest management, which in our case includes a monthly spray and pest species specific treatments as needed. We control the environment where possible, adjusting by the room as appropriate, and also custodial support, which includes regular rubbish removal and space-specific cleaning schedules. For instance, if you have offices, you expect that that's going to be cleaned a little bit differently than your galleries or, say, a kitchen space. So, as I'm sure that you can imagine, this incorporates several different teams with a variety of related goals that don't always overlap. The program that I implemented is predicated on the fact that we have a pretty good grasp of our building envelope. In general, the windows are sealed, the climate is relatively stable, and we address concerns pretty quickly. So my tasks as they pertain to IPM are to observe, track, and document the program. So my elevator pitch speech about myself to introduce myself is that I'm an author, a photographer, and a lifelong learner. This photo here shows that in 2017, I earned the Lance and Elaine Calvert Award for undergraduate research. And that was for my essay, Polyandry Around the World, which has over 10,500 downloads, but you're welcome to Google that. It's relatively easy to find. You can also see samples of my photography work at lauraabenedict.com. I have a bit of a blog that I uploaded a few more just this last weekend. And I'm slowly working on my post-secondary degree. I like to say they're like potato chips. You can never have just one. I keep collecting more. So I'm the anthropology collections specialist here at the Arizona Museum of Natural History. And my previous job was the anthropology collections curator at the Las Vegas Natural History Museum. I love interacting with the public and in outreach and engagement activities as part of my job. None of these photos show it, but I do enjoy things like Ology Day, which is a celebration of all sciences, anything that you can think of that ends in ology or the study of. It's a celebration of science and how we incorporate that into our life. And there's also an annual International Archaeology Day in which I like to have a mock archaeological site. And so I talk about what you can learn from things like ceramic sherds coming out of the ground, how you can sit at your desk and learn about that. The two photos in the upper right-hand corner show some of my presentations as I discuss the zooarchaeological subsistence practices of pre-European contact communities in the southwestern United States. And that's a lot of jargon that tells you that I look at animal remains found at archaeological sites roughly 1,000 years ago and look at how their foodways, what they've eaten, has changed over time. My current job has me primarily behind the scenes. I'm out of the public view, but the central photo shows that once in a while I do interact with the public and get them asking questions that they might not ever otherwise have asked. And one of the reasons why I'm the one in charge of our IPM here at AZMNH is because of my passion to keep our anthropological collection ready for the public to engage with, which includes being clean, organized, and pest-free. And I'll sidebar here for just a little bit to talk about the history of the museum. Our mission is to be a hub of discovery and discourse and positive change that shares evidence-based perspectives about Arizona and the surrounding region. In 1936, the city of Mesa transferred a two-story 19-cell jail from Maricopa County, just south of Phoenix, to the corner of what is now McDonald and Pepper Place. The Works Progress Administration built the building around the cells and completed the job in 1937. So this has always been a municipal building, housing the police department, a fire department, city hall, courthouse, and a library. Fun fact, the original evidence vault is in our basement, currently utilized by the education department. The building was converted to a museum in 1977, and we still sometimes get people coming in to talk about the time that they spent in the cells. The building has been expanded 3 times, and the museum has changed its name twice. In its current iteration, the museum encompasses just under 67,000 square feet with 3 floors of exhibit space. And we hold spaces in the research facility that we lovingly refer to as the annex, just across the street where my office is, and a separate facility housing offices, 2 rooms in the basement of what used to be a post office, and 3 other offsite storage spaces. Locally, we're known as the Dinosaur Museum. But with over 24 galleries, we have more than just dinosaurs. Our exhibits depict caves, an indoor lost Dutchman mine, an outdoor never sweat tunnel, gems and minerals, and ethnographic and archaeological connections, and so much more. With this large diversity of material classes to care for comes a diversity of environmental handling and other requirements that we have to think about on a daily basis. Because of personal timelines rarely match with institutional timelines, no one occupied the anthropology staff positions at AZMNH for over a year in around 2022 to 2023. My supervisor, Dr. Ismael Sanchez Morales, joined the museum about 4 months earlier than I did, which I did at the end of March of 2024. So because of the long vacancy in the anthropology department, there was nobody with the institutional knowledge to help us pick up where the previous IPM program had left off. I was unable to I could see that somebody had tracked pest movement, at least intermittently, but I was not able to recreate their efforts. I couldn't find notes on where they may have placed sticky pest monitors, or how often they were checked, or how often they placed them or changed them. So I started from scratch. In my previous job, at the Las Vegas Natural History Museum, my natural history counterpart was in charge of things like observing the pest monitoring. They had some pest stickies in other places, and so they were in charge of doing that, where meanwhile I did the environmental, tracked the environmental conditions throughout the collections spaces and the galleries. But to my knowledge, there was never an integration of this information to form anything informative to work with moving forward. We never had any pest problems, so that's at least a plus. There was never an infestation. But so when I moved into this job, I needed to learn. I had only a vague idea of where to start. And so where do? You start researching. As scientists, that's what we do. We start asking questions, we start getting more information and moving from there. And so when I considered how to meaningfully observe pest activity in a museum, I obtained some sticky pest monitors and I documented where I placed them, and I created a form that included the room and the current temperature and relative humidity, where I put the sticky monitor, if I found anything on the sticky monitor, and other things that might need attention, other things that catch my attention as I'm observing the room. And there have been a few times when I noticed, for instance, water doing things that water is not supposed to be doing in that area. And when you catch it quick enough, you can clean up the mess and fix the problem, and it doesn't become an actual problem. So looking back, and I can laugh at my efforts now, because that's what we do. We learn and we improve, and we continually learn more and continue to improve. So as I think about what I did when I first started, I had 18 pest monitors over, as I said before, just under 67,000 square feet. And so I laugh at my efforts now, but I've learned, and I continue to learn, and I'm getting better every day, I'd like to say. So this map shows a little bit of where I placed those 18 sticky monitors to begin with. Yeah, if you look, you can see that I have about 9 pest monitors throughout the main museum. And I put 5 in the research facility, 2 in the post, and 2 in our offsite storage spaces. And you might be able to tell that they're all behind doors closed to the public. They're all in places where there's collections. And this was not because I said to myself, oh, pests will only go where we have collections. But this was the first month of coming on to this new position. I'm still learning what my job is. I'm still learning where all the doors lead or where things even are. And so it was a start. It was a place to get things out and start knowing where things are, and to start knowing what do I need to observe and how do I proceed from there. I also needed to learn all about museum pests and how to do IPM as a verb. This is my first foray into what is pest management? What even is a pest? What do pests look like? Why are pests in the area, and how do you keep them out? And so I found some excellent resources online, including through insectslimited.com, where I found some fact sheets for several known pests throughout the country. The sheets are very helpful for things like, what does the pest eat? What does it look like? What size is it? And like its coloration and what it might look like throughout its lifespan. This was very helpful when I started looking at the pest monitors, what I would see on the pest monitors, to try to identify which insect or which pest that is, and then what to do about that. And so I printed all these out and created myself a little booklet to carry around for a little while before I started realizing what I learned what I normally see in the pest monitors. And I don't have to carry that little booklet around anymore, but it was very helpful when I first started. And also, I attended a day-long workshop that was taught by the Smithsonian Institution, and it was hosted by the Huhugam Heritage Center, which, thank you to both those groups. That was extremely helpful to have that. There was a little bit of hands-on, and there was some classroom time, and it was very helpful to start learning how to do IPM. I've also found a few digital workshops online. I have, again, just continue searching, continue looking for other information to try to find things that I can learn about it. So this slide shows some of the things that we find there's a subscription service called Conserve that we had previously contracted with, and we have 8 Conserve data loggers throughout the museum, mostly in our vaults behind closed doors. But part of this is a space to put your observations of what pests are in the area. And they have an online webinar, a series to help teach you about IPM. And so, of course, I watched that. And during this series of webinars, I was introduced to the concept of pest occurrence index, which is something I'll talk about in a little bit. But it's another way to help quantify and visualize problem areas and pests that you might have in your area. This is not a commercial for any product or service, but if you want to know more about Conserve, I can send you a link. While learning a little bit more about pest management and how to identify pests, I update and keep learning more about monitoring and identification and documentation methods. I've increased the pest monitors from 18 to somewhere around 100. We also have added 17 hobo data loggers, which is just a different type of data logger. So the conserves, we have 8 of them throughout the museum, and they track, give or take every 10 to 15 minutes, temperature, lumens, relative humidity, and dew point in the spaces. And I'll show you that in just a little bit. The hobo data loggers I have set to track the temperature and relative humidity once an hour, and I gather that information once a week. While I'm on this slide, I can also point out that I've learned to distinguish between pest insects and incidental insects. So for instance, I will count and track the cockroach and the crickets, and this sticky pest monitor I will change out. But the flying insects on the right side, those are incidentals. Those are things that are there, but they don't indicate a pest. They do indicate other problems. For instance, there might be some moisture in this area, which is a known problem, and we'll work on that. But they're not pests, so I don't have to sit and count those and track them. But I will change out that pest monitor. Which brings me to, I make decisions about when to change the pest monitors. I don't want to change them too often, because while they're not expensive, they're not free. So I'm always price conscious. I'm always budget conscious, and want to make smart decisions. You don't want it to be so full that it no longer works, but you also don't want to change it out just because maybe you have one tiny little spider in there. But this one, this slide will show that these are small, they're unobtrusive, they're on the sides. These pest monitors are still useful. And so I will have used these pest monitors for at least another week. These are cases where there's a couple of pests that I mark with a permanent marker to show that I've counted that. So the next week when I go look at that, I don't count it again. But if this starts getting filled up, then I'll switch this out. But that helps save a few cents each time that I do that. For this one, these are also cases where I would leave it for at least another week. You can start to see there's a little bit, it's been there for a little bit. There's a few instances, this is a little bit yellow. You can, I can see that this is starting to not be as sticky. And so probably the next week I would have changed that out. Even though it doesn't have any pests on it, you still want to make sure they're fresh enough to do the job that you have them placed there for. But in cases such as these, again, there's not the pests, there's not cockroaches or crickets or silverfish. Those are the 3 biggest that I get in my museum. But they're getting filled up with debris or the incidentals. This one has, it's weeping. It has melted a little bit. It's probably in a window the windows around here get very hot, and so this will melt, and then that's no longer as useful as you would like it to be. So these I would have switched out. So I also created a bit of a map of where I place things, just in case, for any reason, if somebody else needs to pick up where I left off, if somebody else needs to find where something is, they can easily follow a map of where I have things. And so I used uh, already existing maps and overlaid these three different symbols. So I have the conserve data logger and the hobo data logger and a pest monitor, and I indicated where I have them. So I won't show every map that I created in this presentation, but including a few of these maps better shows the intricacies of the museum, the number and location of my monitors, and the immensity of the task that I do each week. Before I continue, do we want to get a few questions, Stephanie, or should we just, this would be a good place to stop if anybody has any pressing questions.
Sure, if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and put it in the chat below.
Give it a little bit of time. Okay, if anything pops up, it's okay to interrupt me. I'm all right with that.
Oh, we have one. How much time do
Okay,
you spend IDing insects?
so if it's something like a cricket that I've seen, I know what they look like even when they're bitty. The cockroaches also have a little bit of change throughout their life, but I kind of know what they look like now. And so it's relatively easy for me to look at that and say, okay, that's a cockroach. But things like I'll once in a while get an earwig or sometimes like a carpet beetle. And so if it looks different and I go, okay, I stop and what is this? And if it's something that I start to think might be a problem, I will spend more time. And that's a bit of a cost benefit analysis, how much time you want to spend identifying. We can talk about that in a little bit. But if it's, say, a moth, then I mean, having gone through a couple of IPM workshops, moths tend to be a big problem in museums. And so I might spend a little bit more time to know what kind of moth that is and how I can stop the problem before it becomes a problem. I don't have a slide for it, but we get geckos. Last summer, we got a bunch of geckos, and there's a way to release them if they're still alive when you find them from the sticky pest, so you can let them stay outside because they're beneficial, at least in our area. They eat the pests. They eat things like crickets so they'll eat the pests, and they're our friends, and we want to keep them around. We want to release them from the pest monitors as well as we can. And so there's a little bit in my learning how to do this, where I place the pest monitors and different things of that nature to mitigate the damage that we do to the geckos, but also track things like crickets coming into the museum. Was there any other questions real quick?
Yeah, there are two. So the first one is, do you identify with a microscope?
No, I know that that is a method that many of my colleagues utilize, and I feel like the job is big enough to know where things might be an issue. I'll talk about it in a little bit with the environmental monitoring, and we track things like the humidity, and keeping the humidity down keeps away those pests, most of those pests that are of microscopic size that indicate there might be a moisture issue.
Okay, and then the last one that we have is there a reason you use two different data loggers? Hobo also has monitors that measure light levels. Is the Conserve data logger more efficient in your opinion?
So we use the Conserve because that was here before I arrived. That's something that we have continued to use. The addition of the Hobo data loggers was my idea to track more spaces. And I'll come up to with that in just a little bit about how it's different. That was also a cost benefit analysis. The decision to go with more Hobo data loggers to track a larger space throughout all of the areas. As I mentioned before, it's not just the main museum that we're tracking. So Conserve has it's a set amount per data logger per year. It's part of the contract. And the Hobo data loggers I was able to put there. And I've moved them around a little bit. If I decide that this space is not as informative as I would like, I need to move it here. And so it's much easier for me to do that. That was a cost benefit analysis that we discussed amongst the entire team. So I'll move on. Thank you for those questions. I love questions. I'll talk a little bit now about what I do with this information each week. It does take me some time to gather the information and then to create this report that I create each week. So this slide talks about the pest occurrence index, which I briefly introduced just a minute ago. Before I found this concept in a webinar hosted by Conserve, I tried to track this information using a spreadsheet. It was clunky. It was not very useful. It was frustrating to me. And I was trying to figure out how to get at this information. And then I found this article by Bars and Henderson in 2021, analyzing and presenting pest occurrence data. And I found that because of the webinar through Conserve. And so it presented this easy to maintain formula. It's easy to maintain because it's based on the size of the room, how many pest monitors you have in the room, and how often you check it. So since I check them every week, usually, the size of the room doesn't change, and how many pest monitors I have in a room rarely changes. So the denominator is mostly stable. So then each week I just go and sum the number of pests that I find in that area each week. And I put those numbers into a spreadsheet, and it creates the ratio here, and I just throw up a heat map, and it makes a nice, easy to interpret. For instance, all these greens you see are 0. So that tells me that was a good spot. So I've got a few in this area, and then it's been green. So that's good. What it doesn't show here, but right here, we had a bit of an influx of crickets at Stairway 9, and it has since cooled. So that is another visual way to visualize and see where you might have problem areas and places that might need a little bit more attention when the people who deal with the pests come around and spray or whatever it is that they do. You have a way to talk to them and say, this area has seen more, and here's my proof. Having things like this helps to show that you've been tracking things. You know that it's been good or not so great, getting better, not so much. I like having visualizations. So this shows how many pests this is just a sum of pests that I observe over the week. This has been relatively stable over the year that I've been working with this. Again, I've improved my methods. I've added pest monitors. I've changed where they are. For a little bit, I had some on the floor in our galleries behind the exhibits, or in other places, for instance, in the bathrooms under the sinks. And I said to myself, like, people understand that this is to track pests, but that was apparently not the case. So like children like to pick things up, and that's not always a good thing. So I've had to move everything away from the gallery spaces and the public spaces and put them behind closed doors. And so that was a bit of a trying to figure out where it will still be informative, but away from the public view. But things have been mostly stable for a little bit, probably about a year. And so this graph is just the sum of pests that we found. And I can show the year over year comparison. And anybody who's familiar with the Phoenix area would not be surprised that we have an influx of pests during the monsoons. And so this one is the pest monitors that I've changed. I find it helpful to know how many I switch out each week so that I can be prepared when I go to purchase more, or just to know that, you know, it's a little bit higher in this area. Again, during monsoons, make sure you have a few more. And then if I'm suddenly changing out more, what's going on? Why am I changing out more? And this is probably looks a lot to me like when I talked about crickets coming in through Stairway 9. I added more pest monitors in that area to see maybe I could track where they're coming from. So each week, I capture a 2-year snapshot of the environmental changes in the vaults. So this again is from Conserve that we have had in place for more than 2 years. I've only been at this job about a year and a half. So this is some historical data that is very helpful for someone like me to know where things might need to change or where we're doing things right, and how to do things better for the future. But this is a example of some of the things that if you do use Conserve, this will show. We have temperature and relative humidity is the blue, and dew point is the green in this one area. And this is 2 years worth of data. So you can see that it's mostly stable here. And the dew point is mostly stable, and relative humidity has some ups and downs. Again, this is monsoon time, so again, not very surprising. And then this is lumens in a different space. But again, 2 years to see. So it's easier to track. This is my spreadsheet table that I gather the information from Conserve, and I can create a table and then put in a bit of a heat map, the conditional formatting, to help me see that, for instance, the relative humidity, for instance, got a bit high here for the highest relativity numbers in this area, but you can see the average is still well within range. So even if it spiked a little bit, maybe it rained that night, the average over the month is still within range. And so that helps me to be like, okay, we don't have a problem. It's okay. Contrary-wise, if you do start to see that it's high and remains high, maybe you add a dehumidifier, or it just helps with diagnostics. It helps you to know how to move forward. This is a 2-year average of the averages over the space. This also shows that we have one outdoors for, again, diagnostics and for baselines. If it's getting hotter or if it's getting more humid, you can look at the outside and see, does that correlate? Is it really hot outside? Is it really humid outside? And so it helps you to make those decisions. And so because we recently placed the hobo data loggers, it's only been since March that we placed those. So I don't have a year's worth of data, and I don't have last year to compare it to, but it's still informative to look at this and look at the conditional formatting and see how things are moving in those spaces. This helps, again, to make those decisions as to whether we need to figure out how to place other environmental conditions and how to, maybe we need to seal a window, or maybe it points us to a different problem that we need to address. But I always say you don't know unless you start tracking. So we need to track. Again, this is for the hobo data loggers in a similar way that the conserve data loggers. And because there's some overlap in what they track, the temperature and the relative humidity, the conserve data loggers track also the dew point and the lumens. And so I use just different tables to track those, just to help keep there's less noise. It's easier to focus on what's the important aspect. And again, this helps show just where there might be problem areas, things that you might need to pay more attention to. I combine this information into a report each week that I send to our facilities manager and my boss, and help keep everybody informed. You can't make any decisions until you start having conversations. And again, you need to track, you need to know what's out there. And so I create a nice summary to help everybody. And this helps me, for one. I can only assume that my bosses like to see that if this is the medium relative humidity, it's not a problem yet. It's like barely on the edge of maybe possibly becoming an issue. But something like the high relative humidity, this is over 70%. While this is over the last week, this is something that happened. It probably happened once, or it's been something that again, when you go back to the tables and see the long-term trends, what happened as an average over that period of time. And you see that the average is still okay, but we still need to know, maybe there was a storm that night and it became humid overnight, or it's possible that a pipe burst, and that's how we're going to find the water problem. It's good to know. And so I color code and keep everybody up to date with how many pests I find this week versus last week, and in comparison with last year. And it just, again, with just communication. So summary, I think we're ending just a little bit early, but my summary is just that I joined the team last year in 2024. So I've been here not quite a year and a half. This is a newly populated anthropology department. We're still learning all the intricacies of our jobs and all the things that can go wrong in a museum. As far as I can tell, every collections manager I've ever come across is always learning more about their job every day. And that's part of the reasons why we love doing what we do. I've had a little bit of prior experience with IPM, mostly on the environmental tracking side, so I knew what to do as far as that was concerned. But I've learned so much over the last year about what pests are, what attracts pests, how to keep them out, and which is a pest versus an incidental, and what they can teach you from day to day. And just continuing the education, I continue to go to things like insectslimited.com to look up the pests and see what I have, or what things will look like throughout their lifespan. And again, with the weekly communication, I'm just very much about communicating with all the relevant people that need to know. So I'm happy to take questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura. We do have a few questions. And again, folks, feel free to add those into the meeting chat. First, there was a question about if you would be willing to demonstrate how to release the geckos.
I don't have a gecko to release right now, thank you very much. But if you give me half a second, one second. I happen to have my handy dandy kit that I take around with me. Um, I've got my sticky pest monitors to change them out, and I forgot I was going to tell you all about how I do this. Whenever I change them out, I put the date, and I have a little bit of a code for where I put the item. So maybe it's exhibits number 1, or the one that's in my room here is APA number 4. And then this little last line on the bottom, maybe I'll put Laura's window just to remind me where APA 4 is, right? And so that helps me to track how long it's been there. If a sticky pest monitor has been in the same space for a year, it's probably time to change it, even if it doesn't look bad. You just, right? Sometimes you just change it just because it's been a while. My kit also has things like a flashlight and a door stop to keep the doors open, things of that nature. But for geckos, handy dandy oil. And so I put some oil into the lid and then dribble it on the gecko and let it set there a little bit. It helps to release the sticky part. And then very, very carefully, like slide under and lift up its little toes, right? And so if it's on the sticky and you hold it upright so that when it begins to release and fall, it falls down off the sticky, and preferably there's a bush nearby that it can find safety and shade. And then if you can have some water in a little water bottle lid so that it can try to get rehydrated, because you don't know how long it's been there, but it's probably not very happy. It's probably been there a while. Poor thing.
And Laura,
Yeah.
what kind of
Good
oil
question
do
about the
you use?
geckos.
Is it olive oil that you use?
This is olive oil, but as far as I know, vegetable oil will also work, whatever is cheap. It helps release the sticky, and it puts a barrier between the sticky and the gecko's feet to help them release. And you just do it very gently, very carefully.
Wonderful.
They'll regrow their tail, but I don't like I don't like making them regrow their tail.
Okay, the next question. Have you had conversations with your licensed pest control operator about what they are spraying and where?
Outside. We don't let them spray in our collections areas. I don't know what they spray. I know they spray every month, and that is not part. I am not part of the decision-making process on what or how often. I communicate to our facilities manager and to my boss and other people, and that decision making is I'm not part of that team. But when I tell them, for instance, we have some crickets coming in, they know what to do and how to treat it. So those are conversations with a larger team than just me.
Great. Do you have any recommendations or experiences on bringing flowers into a gallery space and monitoring them?
So best museum practices is no live plants. I've had this conversation with, for instance, there was a time when I was part of a presentation. I helped teach a class, and so the person wanted to bring me a tiny little plant that it was in a little box thing that says "Thank you for helping us grow," which is very, very cute. But I had to take it to my car because you can't have that in the museum. They do attract things like pests, so you need to be firm. You need to talk with your team and talk about why it's an issue to not have things like live plants in the museum. And if you do throw a party that includes like food, for instance, you talk about having the custodial people come and take care of that right away. Yeah, it can be a tricky conversation.
Do you come across information about larger pests and how to manage them, such as squirrels, pigeons, and so on?
Pigeons are a biohazard. You need to get a specialist to take care of that. Squirrels I've not had, but we have come across rodents, and our pest control people have something that the rodent will eat and take back to their nest to help with that. Yep, talk to your professionals about that.
Great. And it looks like there's folks sharing some other really terrific resources in the chat, including
Awesome.
museumpest.net, always a great one.
Mhm.
Let's see, Collections Trust from in the UK, another really great one. See. Okay, I think we've, oh, I see, here we go. Do you enter data in Conserve?
Is this specifically about the pests?
I'll wait for the, yes.
Yes. Okay. This is something that I used to do. I was doing this for a while. And for me personally, I find that the spreadsheet tracking works better for me. I do know that other people have found much success with tracking it through Concert. Concert has its own way of tracking the pests that you see in and around the area. And they've linked to, I think it's the insectslimited.com, so that you can look at the photo in Conserve to see if it's maybe the juvenile of the whatever the pest is, so that you can track it earlier. It's also helpful.
Great. Well, if anyone has any remaining questions, please continue putting them into the chat. I just want to take a second and highlight for everyone that RCWR will be hosting another webinar in a couple of weeks, October 8th at 11 a.m. It's Planning for Climate Change Fueled Hazards, an exploration of the online tool Climate Resilience Resources for Cultural Heritage. So please consider joining us for that. And then also just a little quick plug for RCWR. If you're not a member, memberships as low as $15. We have webinars. We also meet at the Western Museums Association conference. We'll be there next week in Reno. Hopefully we'll see some of you there. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Laura, for sharing with us today. I hope everyone has a wonderful day and has wonderful pest management experiences this week. No bad bugs for all of us this week.
Thank you, Stephanie. Have a great day.
Thank you.